Good morning. I've never been able to command silence like that. It certainly doesn't happen at home and or in the office. So thank you very much for boosting my self-esteem so early on this Wednesday morning. Good morning and welcome. My name is Paul Tilbury, Director of Naiop Vancouver and co-chair, along with the erstwhile Ted Milden of the Naiop Breakfast Committee. And we are delighted to finally welcome all back to a live event here at the Fairmont Waterfront. First, we'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land which we gather on is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As a piece of housekeeping, which will become oh too familiar, please do put your masks on if you have to get up from your table and move around. You are allowed to take your masks off to consume food, of course. We have a full agenda today with an exciting panel on the Vancouver office market. But first, let me introduce and welcome to the stage the Director of Research Services and Strategy at GWL Advisors and your 2021 President of Naiop Vancouver, Mr. Antheo Ewan.
It feels good to be back and not to be wearing sweatpants. This event has definitely been a long time coming, and just happy to be back in this room connecting and networking with all of you. Ironically, this will be the first and last breakfast event of 2021, but I promise you we've got lots of good events planned going into 2022, including our networking event next week on Thursday, November 25th. Which is being held at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre's New Brown Social House. So please do sign up. Tickets are selling fast, and we will have full health and safety protocols in place. Before we get into what is a very timely discussion on the office market, and that's definitely something that is a key issue for a lot of people in this room, I wanted just to give a big round of thank yous to really everybody in this room. This includes our Naiop sponsors, members, partners, stakeholders. I remember back in the start of the pandemic, back in March, our board of directors were fairly cautious about our ability to deliver on our core mandate of advocacy and networking and education. And we were really overwhelmed by the tremendous amount of support that this industry has given us, especially as we transition to a largely virtual environment. We had our Zoom calls and we obviously kept up the pace, but we again were really appreciative of just how great everybody was. And fast forward 20 months later, as we navigate going out of the pandemic, again, we were very impressed by just the level of support that everybody in this room has given us. So thank you again so much. And what I also wanted to do is have a big thank you that goes out to our board, our DLs, our committee leads for their work, just because they were quietly doing a lot of this work behind the scenes. And I think that for our board, obviously there's a little bit of work that goes out to have our exposure as an individual, but a lot of these people during the virtual environment were doing this work just behind the scenes. And I continue to be impressed by just how altruistic they were just to make sure that events like this come together, and even for the events next week, and education day and golf tournament and things like that. So again, a very amazing thing. With that being said, perhaps on our key Naiop initiatives, we wanted to quickly highlight a few, and maybe if you could pull up the slide for the economic benefits report. So we commissioned a study looking at the economic contributions of the commercial real estate industry, set to be released coming up, and the report looks at our contributions as an industry across a variety of different categories, the first being our economic contributions, our generation of wages and labor, but also our contributions to government revenues in the form of development cost charges as well as property taxes. And what we wanted to do is you hear about tech and financial services and things like that. We wanted to really highlight the strength, the depth, and just the growth of our own industry, especially through the pandemic. And so as you can see on the infographic, 15 billion in GDP, 6.3 billion in construction annually, as well as over 2.5 billion in annual contributions to local governments in the form of development cost charges, contributions, and property taxes as well. Please see our website for more details on this report, and you will be seeing kind of snippets as we highlight that on our LinkedIn and Twitter and social media pages. We also are set to publish the results of our ever-popular Cost of Business survey, which will be featured in the December issue of the Business in Vancouver magazine. And the survey provides a scorecard which ranks the Metro Vancouver municipalities across a variety of different things, namely the entitlement approval timelines, as well as development charges associated with constructing a hypothetical project. So every year we alternate towards office and industrial, and this year it's a hypothetical 100,000 square foot industrial building. So as part of the survey, we also do announce several award winners to local municipalities that have exceeded their relative peers in a variety of categories. And maybe before we go on the panel, we actually wanted to recognize some of those award winners. So Chris Wilson with Business in Vancouver, could you please come up and help present the awards? Thank you, Chris. Sorry? If you, yeah. I'm not sure, yeah. So the City of Langley actually won 2 of 3 awards this year, which include first the most improved category, which is to the municipality which shows the lowest increase in municipal fees from the past survey period. And then the second being the most fiscally responsible, which recognizes the city which has been able to maintain the lowest annual average increase in municipal fees over the past 10 years. So congratulations to the City of Langley, and we have Mayor Val Vandenbroek from the city here to accept the award. Or actually 2 awards. Two awards, yeah. Great, thank you very much. Congratulations. And the winner of the most business-friendly award goes to the City of Delta, and Delta scored high across a variety of survey categories and has taken a pragmatic approach to development applications and has attracted a significant amount of industrial development, which is obviously much needed in a time of strong demand and scarcity for industrial space. So here to accept the award for the City of Delta is Councillor Dylan Kruger. Great, thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, so 2 last things. So we do have our Neop Agm coming up on December 7th, and this is just to vote in the new board coming in for 2022, and we also have our call for applications for the Developing Leaders Committee. So we definitely do invite those that are interested to contribute to setting up events and really driving the programming for those under 35 or less than 5 years of experience. So with that, and in closing, thank you very much for being here today. Unbelievable to see you all. Hopefully we'll see you next Thursday at our fall cocktail. So Paul, I will bring it back to you to introduce the moderator and the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antheo, and to all those who worked to bring COB's awards together. Congratulations to this year's winners. Now for our panel. Through last year, Naiop was able to keep its membership informed and engaged with a series of webinar panels that were very well attended. Today, we can finally do this in person and focus on the office asset class. To moderate and lead the session, please welcome to the stage the Executive Vice President, Office Leasing at JLL, Mark Chambers.
Someone left their notes here. Maybe I'll just read those. They're probably more succinct than mine. What do you guys hop up here? And I'll introduce you from here rather than one by one. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Excited to be here. Excited to see most of you in person. After a 2-year layoff, there's a lot to talk about, so I can take that off. Is that okay? Yeah. Hiding behind it, I'm nervous. So after a 2-year layoff, there's lots to talk about here. Lots has changed in the market, so let's get right into it and meet our panel. Try and do this in order. So first up, we have Maureen Neely on the far end, Director Commercial Leasing with Quadrail. Maureen's career in real estate has extended over 4 decades in numerous facets of the industry. Prior to joining Quadrail, Maureen spent 17 years with the provincial government negotiating leases for the province. Maureen joined Quadrail in 2017 and looks after a portfolio of office and industrial properties. Next up, we have Tara Finnegan, Senior Vice President at Cbre. Tara's commercial real estate career has been close to 20 years, during which time she's been a champion for positive change in the commercial real estate industry. She's on a mission to increase female representation in brokerage, to extend the gratitude she has for a successful career as a working mother with 2 young children. Next up, I've got this. It's not the same as my notes. Next up, we have Peter Jenkins. Peter has 15 years of experience in the commercial real estate industry, specializing in office leasing. He's responsible for leasing all market leasing initiatives of 1.9 million square feet of office portfolio. His responsibilities include the pre-leasing of the Vancouver Centre 2 and the False Creek Station project. And finally, we have Matt Carlson, Executive Vice President at Colliers. Matt leads the Tech Office Group and is the National Co-Chair of the Canadian Tech Group at Colliers with a focus on tenant representation. During his tenure, he has completed more than 500 real estate projects for startups, Canadian unicorns, and multinational public companies. So that's our panel. Welcome, everybody. That's the reading portion of the event. I want to thank my grade 9 English teacher for getting me through that portion. Maybe we'll start by setting the stage here a little bit. And for those who haven't been paying attention over the last couple of years, or since the last Neop in-person breakfast, I guess there was a guy that went to a market and ultimately he ate a bat. And then the office market was dead.
What's that done, though, to the millions of square meters of office space around the world? Much of it is empty now, and it could stay that way for a long time.
Across the country, empty streets and empty office towers don't just mean a change in how we work. Entire communities have relocated to new places.
COVID has been a transformation, and that raises a whole bunch of questions. Do you need as much expensive office space?
The uncomfortable truth about offices is that they are expensive and inefficient.
And according to a new survey, 77% of workers want to continue to work from home once the pandemic is over.
Together, we created a new way to work, and we're never going back.
The office is no longer the destination of your work.
According to experts, companies may start to ditch office space, particularly as we head into an uncertain economic landscape.
Austin-based Dell expects more than half of their 160,000 staffers to never go back to their desks.
Working from home permanently is to become a reality for employees of the social media giant Twitter.
The traditional 5 days in the office, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, they're gone. They're not here anymore. People are going to be split between home and office, if not home all the time.
Well, as more companies put an end to remote working, experts predict there will be a wave of resignations.
So is the office obsolete?
Well, there's the question. And we've got, I guess we've got about 45 minutes here to talk about this. And if the office is dead, we can just switch to industrial, because anyone could talk about industrial, as we all know. So I guess this all started pretty early. As COVID started, we got right in. I mean, it was weeks into this thing, and people were already talking about the office being dead. And we came from a market where the buzzwords were collaboration, running and having collisions within the office, creating culture within the office, using the workplace as a hiring tool. Those were all the buzzwords for a couple of years here at Naiop and at other events. So all of a sudden, within a couple of weeks of this happening, really, the office was dead and it was all over. None of those things mattered anymore. So I guess the question is with all these sensational stories that are still going on in many cases, what are you seeing on the streets? Is office obsolete? Where do we go from here? Maybe just because you're closest to me. We'll start with you, Matt. Now what?
Does this work? I like this Zoom-friendly table skirt here. Looks like I'm actually wearing a full suit today. It's great.
You can't turn your camera off, though. You can't.
Exactly.
There's no mute.
I mean, you're spot on. Employers were looking for an excuse to cut costs. Employees were looking for more flexibility, and this provided everybody that opportunity. But to your point, will it stay? I think we've already seen signs that people are returning. People are back in their offices. The numbers are up in terms of in-office occupancy rates. People are polling based on swipe cards, and they're coming back into the office. And I know we're going to touch on this later, so I won't go into too much detail, but it started in the US and the big commitments people were making, Googles and Facebooks and so on. It started with them making commitments to purchase, to lease space, and we're now seeing similarly large companies in Vancouver making those commitments for sizable chunks of office space.
You mentioned polling.
Yes.
Peter and Maureen, are you polling your tenants coming into the offices right now, and are you seeing a major increase in occupancy?
Well, it's hard because yes, card swipes, but when the building's obviously open, nobody has to swipe, so it's hard to really track that. But definitely, we're contacting the tenants and trying to understand how their occupancy levels are, and it's for sure on the upswing.
A big increase, yeah.
But it's just hard to completely track.
Right, Maureen, same idea.
There is an upswing in our office portfolio. I think we did do some card swiping, and we tracked about 25% was coming back last month, and we're up to 30% now, and on average, that's still, and that's in some of our larger professional services buildings, and some of the buildings that are smaller professional services, we're seeing even higher numbers. So it is increasing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Tara, what are you seeing?
Yeah, a lot of my clients are still working remote, but it seems to be like they're starting to, although it's been really slow on the comeback, it's starting to happen. Cbre had to ration us out of there. We were all running back after a couple months, so we have a bit of a skewed perspective, I think.
Right,
but, yeah.
Right. Interesting. Well, we were talking about this, and we haven't, by the way, baked a bunch of questions here today, so these aren't layups for anyone. They're all kind of coming. We know the basic topics, so. But in a conversation we had just talking about what we were going to talk about today, one of the lines that Tara used was the market's incredibly confusing, and I thought that was just perfect. I mean, I think if you're not confused right now, you're not paying attention. It's very strange to hear different stories from everyone on the street. You can talk to 5 different brokers and get 5 different stories on where the market is right now. So. But the one thing I'm consistently hearing is how busy everybody is, and everybody's talking about they're as busy as they've been in their careers, and not just the usual people. I'm so busy. It seems like everybody, and so I'm trying to get a sense, because the transaction volume we're seeing come across our desks, our research division, and the absorption numbers just don't show that. So, what's everyone so busy with?
Consulting.
Consulting.
Lots of consulting.
Doing a deal 3 times. Yeah. Or maybe 4. That's the problem. Just nobody, I get it. People they're paying for office space that they're not using, so it's hard to commit when nobody's in the space, so they just kick the can down the road, and it's obviously getting better, but they can only kick it so far, so you get to a point where they have to make a decision, and then they're going to take the full space, then they're going to downsize, then they're going to need flexibility, and you go through, you think you have a deal, and it starts again. Right. And that's just obviously on the landlord side of things. I couldn't imagine on the broker side, like how many surveys are you doing just to do that one 5,000 square foot deal? But just keeps cycling through.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, in terms of the free work, lots of consulting, that's for sure. The other part is like the margin of error is wider than it's ever been. So, prior to this, if you're looking for 10,000 square feet, you might have a margin of 20%. So it might be 10,000 square feet, it might be 12,000, but that's it. Now it's like, it could be 10, it could be 15, it could be 5. So there's like a 50% margin on either side, not on the upswing, which I think is really interesting. And, the employers, they're trying to rationalize that, because they're saying, well, we might have 100 people, but what if 30 of those people show up? What if 150 people show up at some point 2 years from now? So it does make it quite a bit more challenging for the employers. Just can't plan because they don't know where the employees actually sit physically and literally in terms of their preferences.
So those conversations behind the scenes, what are you hearing, and when you're sitting in a boardroom talking about what people are going to do? How do you get involved in that, and what are the conversations behind the scenes? What are people saying the return's going to look like? If it's that hard to predict, how do you make a decision going forward?
Like I had a client say the other day, they said, we wholeheartedly believe that people will come back. So we have 150 people. We think 150 people will come back, but the surveys today are saying that 75 people will come back. So we believe it. People are saying it, but what they're saying in writing is 50% of the capacity is going to come back, and it's hard for them to gather the data to support that decision. So you empathize with the finance leaders, the real estate leaders. It's really challenging for them right now.
Right.
Hootsuite made that announcement about their return to the workplace. I think that's a pretty interesting one. And then we've talked in length, I've talked to their global facilities and about what that looks like. And they're really letting it be just like a lead by trial kind of process. And I think that that is what's really going to be needed, because there's just no formula for how it's going to look going forward. And they're taking a lot of input. They've got like open Slack channels for employees to give feedback on what they like about this new revised space that they've been given, which is more of that collision space, more hot desk type layouts based on a technology platform, allowing them to book in a desk, a parking spot, like all of those things. So I think that that approach is really what is needed, like open-minded, open to feedback, that kind of thing. So I think that's a good example.
It was nice to see that. That was a good article, and it was sort of the first group, I think, that we've seen in the news that has actually made some concrete decisions, even though they don't know what it's going to look like. But I hope that'll be a sort of a leader going forward. You made a good point, Tara. I think that consulting is a good comment, and I think as we all sat at home in our basements trying to think of what we're going to do all day, every day, you know, we kind of created full-time jobs, and as the markets come back now, we're touring, we're surveying, we're doing deals again. I don't think those full-time jobs we created ended. You know, we're still on the consulting role, plus we've layered other things, and I think that's probably a big part of why everyone's so busy. So, yeah, it feels like a lot of the occupiers are still in sort of that evaluation phase and the study phase. And you know, I think back to when this first happened, and it was almost like, I mean, we've got a room full of people in the industry right now, and I think we're all sitting in our basements for the first few weeks hearing these stories about how the office market's dead, and you start to you start to try and wade your way through it, and then your clients are phoning and say, well, now what happens? When's this going to be over? And you know, for me, it was the analogy was kind of like a car wreck. And you know, you've had a car crash, and now everyone's phoning. So, well, do you want a new car? Do you want a bigger car? Do you want a smaller car? Do you still want to use a car? And you know, the occupant, the tenant, is still sitting in the car going, whoa, like, am I hurt? Right? I haven't got out and assessed the damage yet, but you know, we're all so excited to move the market forward, but the ship turns around very, very slowly. A market just doesn't turn that quickly, and I think we're still feeling those early phases of it. So, should we talk about vacancy a little bit? Everyone's favorite topic, I know, but get into stats. But just talk about what's happened here. And if you think in the Vancouver market, typically, if you go back sort of the last 50 years, it's about a 10-year cycle in the market. And in the last two downturns, the 2009 downturn and now this, really, you know, we're kind of bang on cycle for a downturn. But the Vancouver market has remained today the lowest vacancy in North America. We haven't seen the market, even in those downturns, dip over. You know, if a balanced market's between 8 to 10%, we haven't seen it dip into landlord's territory. Even if anything, it's dipped a little bit into balance. So, I mean, this would be considered probably a major downturn based on what we're hearing on the news. And we went from 5.1% vacancy just before the downturn to 7.1%. And you know, I look around the room right now. There's a lot of people here that have never seen a real down cycle, like a market that's gone into tenant favorable territory. So, I guess the question, long lead up to it, is what's different in our market than other markets? What stopped our market from having, you know, you hear stories about Chicago and LA and Boston, these other major markets having major amounts of space come back, and what's sort of saved our market, I guess, is the question. Who's first? Jump. Peter, jump.
Talk personally, we were just fortunate that our expiries, they didn't pop up for the past 2 years, so we've just kind of planned, or not planned it, but it just lucked out in the draw. So we've skated through this. Some have come up recently, but the activity's picked up, and most of our stuff that has recently, or tenants have vacated, it's been all high-rise space with views and kind of the standard type of space that everybody's looking for in Vancouver. So we've been fortunate that, but the trend of no big space has continued. Like, there's always been those smaller pockets, and that's what it's always been. So that lack of opportunity is still there, so big groups have no choice, and that is just standard Vancouver office space. But from obviously leasing on a landlord side of things, now I can move the puzzle pieces a bit. Before, when it's too tight, you have no opportunity to offer flexibility to your tenants. Now you can kind of move it around and do that, which is nice. Obviously, definitely a different story out of my mouth from pre-pandemic, because there was nothing, you couldn't do anything, and we were still happy that nobody had a choice, but it's good for everybody with a bit of vacancy. So and it's not going too far from the landlord's perspective. So
we haven't had much vacancy. It's good timing for us too in our portfolio over the last year and a half. But I think that Vancouver is just still going to be a tech hub. I think U.S. companies are still going to come into Vancouver. Companies, professional services are coming east. That's what I'm seeing. A lot of inquiries for businesses that haven't been here before. So I think that Vancouver, being a world-class city and a place to live and invest, will always continue to, I think, be at the hub of office space where there is requirements, and we'll continue that.
I think just how we fared through the pandemic is the biggest factor, relative on the global scale. And I think that it's hard to appreciate what that shutdown might have felt like in other places, but certainly, we felt like we were pretty protected in a way in Vancouver. So
maybe also just we're not a head office city, where the head offices are just contracting and reducing and shedding costs as much as possible, where you just have the satellite office where it's already running lean, and there's no opportunity to make it smaller, so you're just, that space coming back to the market just doesn't exist, or just doesn't pop out, because they need that satellite office.
Right, that's a great point, yeah. So this flood of sublease space then that came back to the market, that, there's, again, more articles, a lot of talk out there, but I think it was 1.7 million square feet of sublease space came back to the market. What was the impact of that? And again, vacancy rate's gone up 2% in a major meltdown, as everybody talks about. So what is the impact of that sublease space? What was the impact of that sublease space, and how did you view it, Pat?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there was obviously a ton of sublease space. With our team, we have moved about 95% of all the sublease space that we brought on during COVID. That's, excluding the Cbre subleases at 745 Thurlow and so on, because it wasn't true COVID sublease space that was intended prior. But it's all gone. And what we saw was there was a quiet period. People were not leasing, they were not subleasing. And then all of a sudden it started to trickle back. It started with 725 Granville, which was arguably one of the nicer spaces in the market. It was Mobify's old space. They were acquired by Salesforce. And it was a sublease from Salesforce to Microsoft. So Microsoft makes a commitment first. And the big companies then there's a waterfall. The bigger companies, and then the slightly, less large, the non-trillion-dollar companies, and then the $100 billion companies, and then the $50 billion companies. And we're starting to see it now with, even with some of the subleases that we have, the Cbre space that's 16 to 18 months out. Like, there's a lineup of people who are monster companies, and the companies that used to be these 10, 20, $50 billion companies are in line behind the others. So all of that, in my view at least, has been absorbed, and the main reason why is all the things that helped Vancouver prior to the pandemic, the low vacancy rate. As Maureen said, it's an excellent place to live. We don't have what Toronto has, which is an exceptionally long commute. I know people do commute in Vancouver, but I think part of the reason it's held up is it's a dense geographic area, it's a small area, and people they're making plans. So at least in my view, the sublease spaces have mostly been absorbed.
Can you quickly just name all those big tenants, the lineup?
Sure. I'll tweet it after the event.
I think just aside from Matt's extreme skill as a broker to get rid of all that sublease space is the fact that generally all of that good sublease space has been absorbed over the past year especially. But in that confusing market conversation, like there was a sublease sitting on the market for about 8 months that we came in with a sort of lowball offer to see if we could get a deal. And in the time that we put that deal together, a direct tenant came and scooped it, paying arguably $5 above top of direct lease market just to get that space. So a couple of factors in play, and then that combined with the fact that getting a permit, building out a space right now, it's like a year-long process for a small team that's not viable. Cost, time. So all of these subleases became super attractive and just started going in competitive bids.
So just ready to go space.
Yeah. And like I was calling clients to say, hey, this sublease market, thinking that they were, work from home, they're tech, they're, agile, and saying, I can likely get rid of your space, full recovery. That's what we're seeing right now. And they're like, actually, we've doubled our headcount in COVID. We haven't met half the team, so go get us twice the space, So it's that kind of thing that was happening, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
I find that I'm competing with sublease space in some respects. I had a conditional deal on my head lease, and then the tenant started looking elsewhere and actually put an offer in on sublease space because they're still looking for value deals. So there are still competition in that respect from my perspective.
Right, so deals that were done in an earlier market, guys paid $28 a foot, your space is 42 now. They're looking for that discount.
They are.
So what do you do there? Do you compete?
You gotta let them
as
go.
a landlord? You let them go?
Yeah,
You don't chase the market?
Pardon me, I'm
You
not
don't-
chasing the market.
Right.
I'm not chasing the sublease market.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that circumstance, if you've got a $28 space, you've been leasing space, and you're building for $40 a square foot, is there a consideration just to take it back?
What do you mean?
Just take the space back on a head lease basis and lease it yourself?
Oh, well, not take the space. We're going to try to convert that deal to head lease. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
At the end of the sublease term? I guess it depends on the deal.
No, from the very beginning.
Right, yeah, okay.
That's the
Interesting.
goal, yeah.
Peter, what about you?
Yeah, well, it's not as prevalent as before. We, obviously, we're a conservative group. We'd rather take the income and just ride this out because we see in a couple of years it's going to be better. So where before it would be terminate, we'll just take our chances. We see the upside, we can get a much higher rate, where now it's more of a get your spreadsheet out and see run all the numbers, where before, it would be an easy decision. So it's not cut and dry.
Right, interesting. There seems to have been a mix, and I don't know if from the broker standpoint you said the same, but it seems to be like some landlords just said, don't forget, I'll just get that space off the market and I'll take it back and take my risk on it, hopefully with a tenant in tow. But if it's improved, especially, and you didn't have improved space, and then a more conservative view as well. So it seemed to be all over, and maybe that's part of just having some new ownership in the city and some kind of new thinking that we've got. But pretty interesting.
What was I just going to say, it's not just downtown space. Like we saw that in Burnaby with the Clio sublease at 4621 Canada Way. SDM and Crest Point terminated Clio in favor of a subtenant who was coming in for a new 5+ year deal. So it's not just happening downtown. The landlords are recapturing. They think rents are higher than they were before. In some cases they aren't. Like this was beautiful space. The tags were still on the chairs. Their commencement date was March 1st, 2020, and they never occupied the space. So it was unfortunate for them, but it was a good result. And we're even seeing the landlords take it back in the suburbs.
Right. Interesting. Let's talk rates a little bit. And I mean, gigantic downturn. I don't know if you guys have heard the expression COVID discount. Have you heard that? Yeah. I mean, it was 1 week in when the first calls started coming in from tenants, and we do some renewals, and tenants on the landlord side that were looking to renew, saying, well, geez, we all had it, rent rebates and all that kind of stuff. But what was ultimately, looking back, I guess maybe it's not over yet, but what was the COVID discount? What was the kind of deepest dig you saw? Where do you think rates fell to versus pre-pandemic numbers? Exactly.
I'd say the COVID discount was the sublease market, really. Like that's where all the deals were happening. And the landlords couldn't even come close to competing to that, so they weren't. So it was only when that was being absorbed and they had a chance to compete for a tenant that was at the table that you'd start to see some of that COVID discount.
Well, just more where the space is. Is it high rise? Is it low rise? What's the vacancy exposure of the property? Obviously, the standard response to this is we want to keep our rates similar. We'll offer a higher inducement. So if we can do that, great. The values don't change in our properties. But it was dependent. But to Tara's point, you can't compete with the sublease. So it's just.
Mm-hmm. Matt, where'd you see it?
I agree with Peter. Like the institutional landlords did not compete. They didn't compete for the COVID discount, but I did see some smaller private owners get creative. And like one example, downtown sort of B-ish building, we did $10 for the first year, and then we went to market afterwards, $30. So they said, we will give you a discount, but we're not giving you a discount for the next 5 years. We'll give you a discount for the next 12 months.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
it felt, kind of from what we saw in our numbers, it felt like there may have been a dip, depending on how you look at it, sort of 8 to 10%, somewhere thereabouts. I heard someone else talking on a different panel last week saying they're still expecting, there's been a 15% discount, there's probably another 15% to go. And I'm looking, thinking, well, the deals I'm seeing seem to be kind of pre-COVID numbers again. We seem to be back up there. Are you seeing the same thing overall, or it sounds like it's been relatively steady throughout?
I think the spread's going to be bigger for the new developments that are coming out. We talked about this too, but the commodity space is probably going to be hit the hardest, and as these new developments roll out, that's where you're going to see those COVID discounts and added tenant clauses coming into play for sure.
Kind of going to say it, guys. We did a call, Teams call yesterday, I guess, and we had everyone in the corners. We had Tara and Matt on the top, landlords on the bottom, for my screen anyway. And I said, hey, one of the questions is going to be COVID discount. What do you guys think? What's happened? Has there been a COVID discount? And believe it or not, the tenant rep brokers both said no, and the landlords both said yes. So I thought this would get a little bit more fiery, but everybody's
it's that confusing
too many
market.
eyes out there.
Yeah. So confusing.
Yeah, but it hasn't
so
changed
confusing.
in a day. Let's go, fire it up.
The rates are all over the place right now, because depending on the type of landlord and whether you want cash flow or whether you're an institutional landlord, and we need to hold the value of the building. So I find that they're all over the place. And I think pre-pandemic we were, every time we did a deal, the next deal would be $3, $5 higher, and we'd be asking those high rates, hoping that we'd get it. And I think now the deal is not too much different, but the asking rate is what I'm not planning a higher asking rate. What I'm asking is what I'm wanting to achieve.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it feels like there's at least a little bit of a ground being formed. I mean, even pre-pandemic, it felt, the market was really confusing because it just kept going up. Every deal seemed to be hitting a new level from and we were hitting 50s and some 6s, on the front of deals, and never seen that. Everybody talked about the ceiling in Vancouver being in that $50 range years ago, and now we've blown right through that. So, it's interesting. It's kind of more of an international city.
It depends on the space, though. If it's premium space, there is competition today. If it's sort of commodity space, as Tara mentioned, maybe mid-rise in a mid-quality building, there's a steep discount still, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
And turnkey space.
Turnkey space.
Yeah, show suites. That's what people are looking for right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that something you try and get ahead of? And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I mean, you talk about the permitting process, right? And all of a sudden, you're a tenant in the market today looking around, and as a broker, you have to look and say, that's great, and you can move in here in 14 months, and they look at you, and especially if they're from out of town. So that's got to be a big issue to try and work your way through. And so as the built-out space is gone, from a landlord's perspective, what do you do? I mean, do you start now just speccing show suites and saying, look, I kind of hope I hit it right? Or do you just stick with it and wait for a tenant to come along? If you've got a 5,000 square foot unit right now and there's 30 options in the market-ish, what do you do to sort of get ahead of that? And with the sublease space gone, now what?
100%. Spec it.
You spec it?
Well, it just depends. This kind of size ranges, right? The sweet spot is in that 2,500 square feet. Like 5, it seems there's not a lot of activity in that 4 to 6,000 right now. And then when you get in the 8,000 and up, then activity picks up. So we're focused on that 2,000 to 3,000 square foot spec, where, to your point, it takes months and months to get a permit, then months and months to build it. So even if I start today, it'll be ready next June.
Right.
So
you're going?
Yeah. And selectively, we're not just going to go through the whole building, but
Right.
yeah, for sure, just to put us out in front. But we're strategic a bit as well on, okay, well, obviously you're going to get more bang for your buck if it's in a high rise and with a bit, so you pick the spot and then you kind of work your way through the vacancy. So that one, and it's funny, even when I was working in Richmond at Crestwood, like you start to build the show suite where you get the permit in hand and then somebody leases it. And then even right now, somebody's leased a space that I have a permit on. It's like, well, I guess that's a good problem to have. But you go through all of this work. It's like, okay, let's start the process again. But just with that whole time delay, you just keep doing it. So
Right.
Start as quickly as you can, really.
Maureen, same thing?
Yeah, we're doing the same thing. I think that sweet spot is those small to mid-sized tenants who don't have the wherewithal or the resources to build the suites themselves. So if they can get it ready for them, I think that's great. The larger tenants are, better able to do the TIs.
Right.
Yeah.
It's always been an issue trying to spec a unit. You do perimeter offices, interior.
Meeting room, kitchen.
Pretty standard. How do you do
Yeah.
that today, though? I mean,
Open space.
we're hearing that tenants don't even know what they want yet. They don't, even Hootsuite are the closest you've got, but they're building space out that they don't even know if it's going to work. How do you guess? How do you hit the target on that, or do you just go for it?
Well, hopefully it shows it nicely, and it shows better than the competition. And it's interesting how people these days are taking concessions just to have space right away. They'll, from bigger tenants, be non-contiguous just because they need the space right away. So that's the hope that you do. But just to Maureen's comment, 2 offices, leave a space in the middle that you could add a couple offices, a kitchen and boardroom, you're done.
Tenants are also okay to just buy one of those room things or something that they might need if they need extra infrastructure. So they're filling in the gaps themselves if it's something that's ready to go that they want to put their team in.
Like those little phone
Yeah.
booths or whatever you can get. Yeah. It's obvious. The permits are a big part of it, right? In a market that are traditional deals 5 years, if it takes you a year to get a permit, it's 20% of your kind of lease term, if you can even wait that long, right? So probably good for the co-working groups, but we're not going to talk about co-working today. I think that's been talked about a lot on these stages, but but the build-out costs. So, I mean, a $50 allowance years ago used to get you an awful long way. It used to be a $25 allowance, free Vogel. I'm sure you remember those days, old guys like us. But $25 used to get you almost a full build-out, and now you get $50 a foot, which is just a huge amount. But really, as you build your space, you're kind of $200 a foot. Let's say you're $225 a foot to build your space out. So from a tenant standpoint, you need a capital expenditure for 20,000 feet of $3.5 million. I didn't do that right now. I wrote that down. But you need $3.5 million as a capital expenditure. So to move into 20,000 square feet right now, you need to go to head office and say, hey, hey Chicago, I just need $3.5 million to move my Vancouver office. Is that a big challenge? Is that, or are more and more people just saying, sure, post-COVID, we'll spend the money on our people and our space, and it's not going to be an issue?
Go? Yeah, sure.
Let her rip. Let her rip.
I would say yes. Some of the bigger companies do have that budget spec'd. They have their capital groups, their capital committees, and they go and they look for this money years in advance. So in some cases, they were budgeting for it well before. We are seeing people overspend, so to speak, because they're trying to encourage people to come back to the office. So the message we're seeing is we need to make this extra special because people don't want to come back. So we're going to add this special thing, or we're going to add a certain thing that is a draw. With that said, it's expensive. Like you say, it's really, really expensive. It's the first time in my career since 2009 I've seen triple-digit TIs. Before it was like you would never really crest above 80 or 90. I've seen a couple recently. I've also seen landlords more willing to completely turnkey the space, which hard to put a value on that, but 125, 150.
Right.
And we never saw that before. They're saying, listen, we'll take this on, we'll put it under our base building permit, we'll save you time, we'll spend more money than we otherwise would have because we know it's going to get you into the building. That's what we did with the LaSalle deal over at Broadway Tech. It's a full turnkey right down to the doorknobs and the door handles and where the wiring comes into all the different meeting rooms. The developer just said, we have this and we understand what you need and we'll get you in there. And that was something that was signed in the midst of COVID, earlier this year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Peter, how far do you stretch? Like, what do you do for right on the hot seat? Here you go. How much will you give?
Triple digits.
How much will you give?
It's funded by somebody else.
But if you have a Fortune 10 company, how far will you go?
Well, it's nice that
Exactly.
we're seeing 15-year deals now, which usually in the past has kind of topped out at 10 years, so that's a little bit easier to stomach a higher TI.
That's not a number. I think the question was how much.
How much? Well,
how much you pay?
$70. You're like, that's so pre-COVID. Where I'm skirting that answer. I think that companies really need a reason to move. If their space is inefficient, if they are on non-contiguous floors, and is actual a benefit to the company, then they'll go and spend the money. But if they can make it work, they're going to make it work and deal with it 5 years from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. One thing that I was interested in, that I was expecting a lot of one-year deals through this period, where there was only a handful of those, and then more the 3 to 5 year extensions, so which was nice, and not a plethora of termination options as well. So people believe in it, but there's definitely a big disconnect between the head offices and the local offices, where the head offices like cut costs, people are going to work from home, and then you go and talk to the people actually in the office, they're just shaking their head. We need more space. How are we even going to do this? This is what they're doing to us. But that was just a completely, the right hand's not talking to the left hand. Sorry to give you a number.
No, you still didn't. What a dance, though. That was unbelievable. Maureen, how high do you go? Let's get an answer.
We don't have any large blocks of space that I can, no. We'll do the deal that makes sense. If we can achieve our rates, I think that's what we're more focused upon, is keeping our rates. But I do find that even larger tenants are looking for space that has partial build out of what they need, as opposed to starting from shell, just to save some money when they can.
Right. Try this a little differently. So if
number are you getting? Your building.
So if you're, yeah, because I own a lot of office buildings. So if you would do a $70 allowance and you had a Fortune 10 company, if you do a $100 allowance on a 10-year term, that gets you an extra $3 a square foot if you can amortize it, which is better value for your building. So isn't a higher TI better?
You can have that covenant.
Microphone.
Yes.
Yes.
You squeezed it.
Okay.
You squeezed it out of them.
Let's
another $10.
Let's talk a little bit about deal terms. And there's something called negativity bias, which is a tendency to give more weight to sort of negative talk than positive talk. There's obviously tons of negative news in the market right now, negative articles, which we've talked about repeatedly here, but they keep coming out. And from a tenant standpoint, what we're hearing is more tenants saying, well, the market's falling apart, and all they're hearing is the negative and the negative and the negative. So I think it's leading to a little frustration from a landlord side, because we have tenants asking for the moon right now, asking for ROFOs, renewal options, renewal rights, expansion rights, contraction rights. Like, you're getting these offers and RFPs right now that have everything, and it's probably partly tenant confusion, but I want expansion, contraction, just absolutely everything thrown into these RFPs. How are you dealing with these requests? And maybe I'll start with I'll let Peter take a little breather and have a glass of water, but start from a broker's standpoint. How do you control these requests? When you have a tenant really asking for what's typically unrealistic asks, in what's, from a 7.1% vacancy rate, it's still very much a landlord's market. How do you deal with those requests? How do you control that?
Go for it. Yeah, it's a good question, for sure. I think, to your point, it's not coming out of a place of tenants aren't doing it to be cheeky. They're not doing it because they think they can ask for the moon. In many cases, it's confusion. They don't know what they need. They don't know if they need 3 floors or 2. They're trying to rationalize all of this. And, the other part of it is in my view, they're sussing out these landlords and understanding who's going to be the best partner with them long term. So they're saying, hey, there was this massive disruption. Some landlords handled it really well, others not so much. And so the tenants are going to them and saying, like, I'm looking for that flexibility. I'm looking for a long-term partner. And will you be that partner for me? Will you give me these things? And we are seeing landlords come to the table on the basis that they want to help these tenants. They want to be collaborative. So yeah, that's what's going on. And very few people are super contentious about these rights. They understand that everybody's in the same boat and things are fluid right now.
Right.
I think there's just a lot more creativity in the deals, and not to be so pushy. That doesn't seem to be what tenants are going for. They want to know that they're getting the best deal and they're getting all of their deserved options, right? So it's just about working through what they need, why they need it, conveying that to a landlord. For some of them it's board, right? Like term length. you need the 10 years to get the deal put together and make it make sense, but is there a termination option, even if they have to pay for it?
Right.
And then maybe that becomes a trade later, like, okay, we'll give up that option. We want 10 more bucks TI because our costs are coming in really high as they're doing due diligence on a deal. So it's just about managing the communication, you know, on both sides, from my tenant rep and my landlord experience. And it doesn't seem to be offensive, it's just having to work through it and sort of explain both sides, right?
Right.
So.
Maybe initial shock from a landlord's perspective, who's used to a more heavily landlord market. Maybe that's part of it. Peter, how do you deal with these? Is that your initial thought? You got to be kidding me as you read some of these? Be honest.
Well, we want to lease space, so we're definitely, and we understand the struggles that all these companies have, so we're definitely willing to be, as Tara put it, more creative and kind of figure it out. But it's, if there's a story behind it, not just the ask, like give us some reason to, because obviously we're the leasing people, we've got to report to the owners and we've got to have the whole picture, not just they want it because they want it. So where everybody is more flexible these days and just wants to keep doing deals. So, and just all the other things we talked about, the other competition, everything out there, you have to really check all those boxes or you're not going to be able to do the deal. So,
right. Let's talk a little bit about the new builds. We've got a big wave coming on right now, and I think back to 2014 where I actually moderated an event, and the consensus in the room was we had 1.8 million square feet coming to the downtown market, and the sky was falling. This was impossible. We would never absorb this amount of space. Vacancy rates are going to 16 or 18%. The sky is falling, and it felt pretty consistent with everybody you talked to. We're a major overbuild cycle. Fast forward now, we're coming out of a downturn. We're delivering 4 million square feet to the downtown market, and it feels like over the past 3 years, no one's even talked about it. We just said, no problem. We'll breeze through it. So I guess the simple question is, what's changed? What's changed in the mentality in Vancouver in 6 years that won't be an issue at all, and we can handle two and a bit times kind of what we thought was just a dramatic overbuild in the city?
Amazon.
Let's move on.
Yeah, it's just would take 1.2 million. No, but just that whole trend of the larger tenants coming in,
right.
Which that tap hasn't been turned back on right now, but there's all the talk of the hope of that tap coming back, or all of those groups coming back, where, but even just when we were talking about this yesterday, and you'd mentioned it with Microsoft taking space in 725 and then taking Miller Thompson's, 48,000, so they've taken 80,000 in COVID, and rumor that Amazon's looking for another 250, so that space can quickly get gobbled up if all those groups come back, and then everybody seems to follow the big groups. So right. With the confidence piece of the puzzle, well, I know I'm hoping. You are too.
So I mean, it sounds like we're kind of banking on this big tech boom going, and these big tech giants continuing to grow here. Is it the same ones? Is it Amazon and Microsoft, or is there new entrants? Is there guys kind of percolating? Cbre are obviously a huge occupier now.
Yeah. There's definitely new entrants. I mean, my view is Vancouver's reached a tipping point where we're not coming back in a positive way, meaning we have these companies like Amazon that we mentioned and Microsoft. There are so many people here doing so much work, whether it's at home or at the office or even part-time, that I personally can't fathom a world where 30,000 employees just move out of Vancouver and it's a vacuum. Like I have a friend, he lives in New York City. He's from here, he lives in New York, he's on an entrepreneur's visa, and he filed his renewal. You have to do your renewal every couple of years, and his renewal time was 1 to 11 months. And he's like, what the heck? And he's been there for 8 years. So he was actually delayed during COVID, had to move back to Montreal temporarily just to work, and he was on secondment with his work, and it all worked out for him. But the point there is, like I was talking to him the other day, he said, it's just impossible. Even if you're in the United States, it's almost impossible to renew your work permits. It's hard to get new people in. And I think we're gonna see that. Canada will be the major beneficiary, and that includes Toronto and Montreal. These big companies will continue to grow because it's just such a great place for talent. It is more affordable, but it's also easy to get people in. So I think that's what's gonna drive a lot of the growth over the next 5 to 10 years.
So tech's going to take the new builds are going to be mostly tech. which is interesting because as this wave came through, I think we're 68% leased in this wave, and it's been a little bit bumpy, obviously, the last couple of years, but just interesting that a lot of the deals that were done weren't tech, in the new builds. You've got Kabam in your building, but you look at, the big law firm deals and accounting deals that really kicked off the next wave. Maybe they missed the wave earlier or wanted to get into some better space, and then it feels like it's been a little bit spotty, Peter, the last little bit with the new builds for maybe obvious reasons, but I talked to our agency teams in other markets like in Chicago and in Boston and Atlanta and some of the other LA, the other major markets, and they're saying the new builds are where all the activity is right now. They're saying the new builds are where people want to be right now, and that's sort of a hot spot. So I guess there's hope, and maybe we're just lagging those markets by a few months. But it's interesting. It's also interesting just in preparing for this. I looked back at the last 2 waves of new builds we've had, and when Bentall 5, 250 Howe, kind of in 2002, when that wave came through, at this point, they were about 70% leased. If you put them all together, they weren't at the exact same time. So we're 68 today. We're very similar despite coming through the pandemic. 2014, and it was sort of spread. Some of the buildings were spread out a little bit like we are right now, but 2014 to 2016, same thing. We were 70% leased at almost the exact same point. So we're kind of on par right now. And to your point, Peter, all of a sudden, you get a couple of these big tenants come in and boom.
What would happen if the pandemic didn't exist? Boy, we were on fire before all this.
On fire, unstoppable, unstoppable. So I guess that brings us to the next question. If you owned a site downtown right now, you were kind of priming, getting ready to go, delivery 2025, let's just say, would you go? And would you go on spec?
Get through VC2. That's our problem. It was a stretch for us to build this building on spec, but the city is not you've got to build on spec.
You've got to build on spec? Yeah.
So we wouldn't, but once we get through VC2, we could just dust off the old memo for VC2 and go in for spec. But
and what did that memo say?
Well, yeah. We're, with Falls Creek Station, that's just a hurdle that we're dealing with right now. We need a certain pre-lease commitment before we can go ahead. And part of that problem is that we've got the risk in VC2 we've got to get through before we can dust off the memo and go in to deal with building that on spec. So it's hurting us right now, but we'll get there. But unless we obviously get a large commitment and we can proceed with a tenant in tow. But
who else would go?
With both of their money, I would go. With their money?
With their money?
Go. For sure, you go. Yeah.
Well, you have to. You go? Yeah.
Yeah. The kiss of death is you show up on a survey, and if it says September 2024 completion date, September 24 move-in versus 36 months from lease signing,
right?
In my view, that's hard, right? The tenant's like, well, what is 36 months? 36 months from when? So my view is you go on spec.
36 months, and then on top of that, you've got your build out.
And then the build out,
tenant,
and
right?
then,
Which could
yeah,
be
and then potential
year.
delays and city and all of that. So I think you go.
Right. So you're a tech company, a major tech company coming to Vancouver right now, and you look and say, Matt, I love the design of your building. Like, can I be in there? And you say 4 years.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard.
A lot of these tech companies are 10 years old.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's a huge part of their life. Yeah. That's interesting. So you'd go for sure. There seems to be a bit of a shift to the suburban market, and everything was downtown. Everyone wanted to be downtown. This was the big driver for years. You talk to the tech groups, everybody wants to be downtown. And all of a sudden, the activity in Burnaby, the vacancy rate in Burnaby's dropping, the vacancy rate in Richmond's dropping, Surrey, Mount Pleasant seems to just be absolutely on fire. Some major transactions there. But what's the drive to the suburbs right now? What's driving that market? Those markets.
I don't think we can just say suburbs. I think we have to say like periphery of core as well. And I just think people are a little bit more mobile after this experience. Like they don't feel as rooted to one thing. Like we have a downtown office per se. So now they're considering other areas. They're going to have a combination of work from home. So they want their hub to be, super compelling. And like Mount Pleasant just has that natural, compelling, magnetic energy that everyone seems to really like. It has like the live work, the lifestyle, all those things. So I think that those elements are becoming more important when you look at the context of your office. And that's why, especially Mount Pleasant, But also even Burnaby, like, you've got, you know, your teams. I don't think you're seeing a flight to the suburbs at all, right? Like, it's more, there's been lots of activity from those companies that already were in the suburbs.
Right.
So.
Right. Any of it value-based, or is that it?
I mean, one of my most expensive deals last year was on Low Heat Highway. You know,
Right.
The net effective is higher than a lot of the office deals I did in 2020. So, yeah, it's just confusing.
That wasn't a good ad.
Confusing. Really confusing. But, you know, there was limited inventory. It depends if you're on transit. Like, there's all these things that play into the reasoning behind it. But, you know.
You make a good point. I mean, you've got to, how do you draw your employees back into work if you're sitting in your house working on your back deck, and now you get to travel for 40 minutes and now sit at a little cubicle, and, right? You got to make that experience better than being at home, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's interesting. We talked about this a little bit, but we track the deals done per year by industry type, and we've tracked kind of every year deals, not square footage. And normally we get sort of between 65 and 75, 74% are tech deals in the city. And year to date, 2021, we've seen about 35% of the deals tech this year. So we talked about this a bit. I think everyone was surprised until you thought, take out some of those big stomper tech deals and the actual deals. So why is tech just slow to the draw right now? Have they not been able to come up from Seattle or Palo Alto to look at space, or what's the disconnect, I guess, since, you know, compared to the last 6 years?
I think tech is one of the industries where there are people that you can work from home from a large scale. Professional services and financial services, you're in the office more. So I think the tech companies are, they're not making their decisions yet. They're still trying to evaluate who's coming back to the office. So they're just delaying decision making. And that's why the lower velocity.
There's probably also quite a bit of pent-up demand from those traditional, they couldn't, you know, stomach jumping up to the higher rates that we were seeing constantly pre-pandemic, right? So suddenly it was like, oh, we can actually take a breath and take that space that was next to us that we haven't had any access to. So I think there's been, like, I've seen that from some of my more traditional clients, like just taking that opportunity to get space that they previously couldn't. So that might be part of it.
Right.
I would say it comes down to talent. I think, at least in my view, the professional services firms seem to have a greater ability to influence people to come back. They can say, you know, this is a mentorship program. You're going to come in, you're going to learn from so-and-so, and this is the program. Where the tech companies they're petrified of losing talent. And it's so competitive. If they lose that one engineer that produces 10 times as much work, 10 times as much code as somebody else, like, they're in big trouble, and those people are more likely to vote with their feet. They're more likely to go somewhere else. They're more likely to go to another job, and they're being hounded. Like, they say, oh, my CTO got 15 inbound job requests last month.
Right.
And so I think the tech companies are just a little more hesitant to make a big move that would result in the loss of some of that key talent than professional services.
Kind of brings us full circle a little bit, because the office space has always been that spot where you want people to feel like they're engaged, feel like they're part of something, and kind of create that stickiness, right? So how do you do that when someone works from home, and how do you, the mentorship is certainly one of the things, but how do you feel like you're part of something? And, you know, in some ways, you talk about this great resignation going on right now, people quitting, saying they want to go back, and I wonder how much of that is just the fact that for the last 2 years, you've just lost that connection of being able to want to check in with Peter and see how your kids are and what's going on and how was your trip, and all of a sudden you kind of lose all of that, and it doesn't matter. It's just sort of a name. So,
Matt, you should comment on what Cbam's doing at VC2, just as what they're doing on the bottom floors as a special place for bringing your employees. But
yeah, part of this was planned prior to COVID, but they wanted to make the space like a true hub, like something really incredible. So as Peter mentioned, on the 7th floor, there's 2 patios at VC2. So on the south side, it's a dedicated patio for Cbam. On the north side, Great West was accommodating enough to turn it into a dog patio. The whole building's dog friendly. So anyone who comes to work in the whole building can bring their dogs. They can come down. They run them outside on the 7th floor. But what Cbam's doing on their side on the south is they've cut a hole between 7 and 8 that's 3,000 feet.
it's half the plate.
Yeah.
They've removed half the plate.
it's massive. So 30-foot ceilings, leads to their patio, doors that slide open, these eclipse doors, and like they're building this massive lounge and stage where all the employees can get together, hundreds of people can sit, theater, auditorium style, inside, outside. It's really going to be spectacular. Peter saw it the other day. I'm going to go next week and check it out. It's not built, they've just done the cutout between the slabs. So like that's an example of someone who's going over the top in order to have these employees walk in and just feel that it's such a special place and it's somewhere they'll want to come, they'll want to work. And they might not even work at a workstation, they just might work in the cafe. Sit there on their laptop, they'll sit on the bleachers like people did in university, and a lot of these people just got out of university, right?
Yeah.
So it's familiar, it's cool. I think we'll see more of that going forward.
Right, nice. We're getting close to time here, so maybe some final comments. What do we see going on? What's going to happen 2022 and beyond? Let's start maybe in order. Maureen.
I think that people are COVID's not going away, but people are learning to live with it. So I think people are going to be, tenants are going to be making decisions. The recovery is a bit faster than I thought it would be. I'm seeing a lot more activity now, and I'm starting to do more deals now. So it's going to be a positive net absorption in the next couple of years. Yeah.
Tara.
I think a little bit more confusion before we come out of the clouds, and I think it's going to take like the better part of a few more years for companies to figure out how they're going to use their workplace going forward. So I don't really see any clarity on that. Everyone was gunning for an answer 2 months into the pandemic, but that's not realistic, and this has gone on a lot longer than we thought, and maybe will continue to. So, yeah.
I'm excited to be in person with people. It's like I've been locked up at home for too long. And I think that's the that's everybody says that. But the positivity and how things are going, what I'm hopeful that will change is the team and Zoom calls will not drop off altogether, but simmer down, because doing your day job plus all this is just not enough time. And the separation between home and work, how that all shapes up, I'm also keen to figure out, because it's exhausting right now. So seeing how that all plays out, but I think we're on the up and up, just how quickly we get back to where we were. I always say we're kind of in our little Vancouver bubble world that seems to just toot along and do quite well through all of the ups and downs in the world. So I'm positive for sure.
I think we're still going to see a lot of change going forward, and to add to the confusion comment, a lot of people are developing a hypothesis. Like they think they know what's going to work when they get back to the office, and it might work, or it might not, or we might see change. So I think everyone's going to be testing these hypotheses going forward, and once people get back in, I think over the next 24 months we'll still see a lot of change as people adjust and shift their strategies. So that's my view.
Right. Let's close. Maybe we'll add some external voices to this, and maybe end with something a little bit more positive than I started with.
It does not work for younger people. It doesn't work for those who want to hustle. It doesn't work in terms of spontaneous idea generation. So
how does it work for your culture in terms of
it doesn't work for culture.
Yeah.
But I believe that the office space is going to be fairly similar to what it's historically been. If you think about where we were at 6 months ago, people thought that we'd never be in the office more than 20 or 30% of the time, and those population could live all over. I don't see that happening. And what they're saying is that what we are seeing down the road is a need for people to work together. And if we asked everybody what they want, they'd want to not exercise and eat ice cream and pizza every day. Leaders have to lead, and they have to do what they believe is best for the long term for their employees.
I mean, most of us learned by an apprenticeship system, by seeing mistakes, going to trips, how do you handle a client, how do you handle a problem. So it's hard to inculcate culture and character.
Encouraging interactions. Google calls it casual collisions, but you might know of it as the water cooler effect. The theory goes, when we interact with each other, especially people that we might not normally talk to, we think of new ideas. We refine, we learn, we get unstuck, maybe even find friendship.
That's a sure sign that office spaces will outlast COVID. And so is this, a survey of CEOs from KPMG. Last August, 69% said they would downsize their company's physical space. When asked this spring, it's just 17%.
What we'll see in the office space of the future is lots of amenities, more vibrancy, and more flexibility for users.
I think overall there's lots of confusion in what's going on right now, but it's clear to me the Vancouver market, once again, through this major downturn, is going to fare really well. So I know Paul's going to come up and say a couple words, but let me say thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to Naiop for getting us all back together, and everyone go back to your offices.
Thank you. I'll just ask the panelists just to remain seated, but thank you very much, Margaret. Fabulous information as always, very insightful. Maureen, Tara, Peter, Matt, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're delighted to present each of you with a small token of our appreciation that can be consumed with loved ones, colleagues, or at my table right after we close. And I'll give you those very shortly. I also wanted to do a big shout out to all of the sponsors of Naiop. We can't do what we do without your support, and we look forward to your continued support in 2022 and beyond. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the staff here at the Waterfront. Any of us who have hospitality tenants in our portfolios can appreciate the difficult times that anybody in this particular sector has gone through, and we're delighted to be able to be back and allow them to be back at work. So thank you for the work you do here at the Waterfront. As Anthony mentioned earlier, we've got a couple upcoming events. Next Thursday, November 25th, first Naiop cocktail event in person at Brown Social House, Cbre Theatre, 3:30 in the afternoon. Our AGM's coming up December 7th at 8:30 a.m. Pull that in your calendar. It's always exciting. And our next breakfast, the first of 2022, is slated for January 27th. All of those details you can find at naiopvcr.com. So thank you all very much for coming out today. This concludes today's program, and as we sit here in the middle of November, may I wish you all a very merry holiday season. Thank you.